There are evidence-based best practices for ending homelessness. These strategies work best when the various service providers in a community come together, aligning around common goals and collaborating on programs. So what's needed to make this kind of system transformation happen?
Hi, my name is Sean Whitten, and I'm the CEO of Institute, formerly Rapid Results Institute. And I'm going to talk to you about systems transformation, why it's needed, and how to do it. So I think what's really important to kind of level set is that systems transformation is hard. And there are multiple reasons why it's so difficult, but I do want to pinpoint on two of those that we see when we work with communities. The first is that organizations work in silos. There are different policies at organizations, there are various practices, different case management and outreach styles, or policies and procedures around case management. So I think a lot of times we need to step back and think about what are the policies, practices, activities we can do in common and align those policies and practices so we're providing best services for those individuals that are experiencing homelessness. I think another reason why systems transformation is so hard is because we have competing agendas. We're competing for existing resources, we have varying political agendas, and we see a lot of power differentials between organizations, the city, the county, which makes it difficult to really transform systems collectively. So what we do at our organization is we work with communities by bringing the whole system together to tackle homelessness. And when we say the whole system, we're thinking beyond the housing and homelessness response system. We're actually thinking about other organizations, other sectors that interact with and provide services to the same folks we are working with to get housing and housing services. So a few of those that you should consider when you're thinking about systems transformation are private sector and nonprofits, of course, continuums of care, the legal system, both legal advocates as well as sheriff's departments, police departments, folks that you think you can pull in from the legal system that can be brought on to understand housing and homelessness and play a role in making the experience better for those that are experiencing homelessness. Of course, people with lived experience, not only to get feedback and advice from, but to be at the table making decisions, determining policy, and even thinking about continuum of care funding and evaluating where those funds should go. You want to bring in the health and education system, and then other housing justice advocates, particularly thinking about folks with an equity focus, advocates that work with people experiencing homelessness in multiple different ways. And when you bring those folks together, we believe, and what we've seen success in, is that there are four key things that need to happen when this new group forms. There needs to be strong collaboration. You need to be evaluating your current systems. You need to be innovating towards systems transformation. And then you need to execute those new innovations to be able to test and experiment with their effectiveness and how they can lead to change. So I'll tell you a little bit more about those four components. The first one being collaboration. And a couple of examples of what that can look like is, as I mentioned before, collaborating with non-homelessness response orgs and agencies. And true collaboration with people with lived experience includes paying persons with lived experience for that knowledge and what they bring to the table. When we talk about evaluation, you really want to make sure that you're evaluating your existing data processes and needs and evaluating barriers to housing in the system. Innovation is creating structural, relational, and transformative changes together, as well as being bold in developing solutions to challenges in your system. All of this leads to execution, which is implementing these new policies and practices and implementing new decision-making models in your community. So as I mentioned before, I am with Institute, formerly Rapid Results Institute, and we are known for the 100-day challenge. Some of you may be familiar, some of you may have participated, and I want to share with you our own journey into determining a framework that would work in systems transformation for our communities. So some of the things we did really well during the 100-day challenge is we increased the number of people being housed in communities. We brought those multiple stakeholders to the table, as I explained before, and provide an environment for experimentation. The general outcome was more people being housed. But what we weren't thinking about was how are we going to sustain the change that occurred during the 100-day challenge and use the knowledge that was gained to be able to transform the system for the future. And so some of those deltas, things we should have done better, was we did not provide a strong strategy for sustainability, as I mentioned. We weren't thinking beyond the 100 days and how to support communities. We did not explicitly focus on transformative change. We had that focus on housing outcomes. And we did not explicitly evaluate the why. It's one thing to house a lot of people. It's another thing to really dig deeply into thinking, why weren't we able to do this before? Why are we able to do it now? And how do we capture that magic to be able to transform our system? So the framework we found to help us support communities towards systems transformation is what we lovingly call the Systems Transformation Triangle, which was developed by FSG as the Waters of Systems Transformation. As you can see from the triangle, there are 3 specific areas that we believe are the main components and most important things when it comes to systems transformation. One is structural change, one is relational change, and one is transformative change. And I'll tell you a bit more about what those mean. So when you're thinking about systems transformation, you have to think about changes in the structural areas. Those are typically policy, which is rules, regulations, and priorities, practices, activities targeted to addressing and making progress, and resource flow, which is how resources are allocated. When we think about relational, which is a little bit more difficult to transform, we're talking about relationships and connections. So quality of connections and communication occurring, and power dynamics. Which individuals and organizations hold decision-making power, authority, and influence? We've learned that the most difficult part of that triangle is transformative, which focuses on mental models. These are deeply held beliefs and assumptions that influence one's actions. Some of those examples of those might be NIMBYism. Another example of that is stigma in regards to people experiencing homelessness and what the circumstances are around people's homelessness. So I'd like to show you an example of how one community used the triangle to identify challenges and innovations in their system. The community determined that there was a low number of chronically homeless individuals utilizing their shelters. And so we began to map those challenges against the triangle. One of those was there was a no pet policy. Another one, as terms of practice, was that it was first come, first served beds. They also identified around resources that not everyone knows how to access the shelter. When it came to the relational change, the relationships and connections, they determined who you know improves your chances for access. And with power dynamics, they found that shelters can pick and choose who uses shelter. And when it came to the mental models, shelters are more focused on day-to-day than case management and want to serve the ones they view as less difficult. Now, some of these may sound familiar. Many of us have experienced these in our own systems. And I think it's important to note that this triangle can be used to work to create an innovation for any of those challenges. I'll share with you the one that the community picked and then how they use this triangle to overcome it. So they decided they were going to focus on the policy, which was the pet policy issue. They felt that if they could figure that out, the folks that are coming to their shelter who aren't using it, quite a few of them had pets, and they wanted to see how they could make that change. So they did the exact same thing as they did when identifying the challenges is they just mapped it using the triangle. And I'll give you some examples of what that looked like. So they determined that for a policy, it's kind of obvious, they needed to create a policy allowing pets in the shelter. In order to do that, they had to work on the other components of the triangle. So for practice, they determined staff need to be trained to work with pets and include that in the care plans. For resources, additional resources were needed for pets. For relationships and connections, They needed to develop relationships with animal shelters as well as pet-friendly landlord and housing. And for power dynamics, they needed an adjustment to prioritization and admittance to the shelters. And last but not least, the one that's very challenging is for mental models. They needed to get folks in the system to recognize that pets are not viewed as a deterrent, and pet care is built into client care models. Once they identified all of the innovations around the pet policy issue, they then had to make an action plan. And I'll give you an example of the one that was used. So they determined that they needed to map out a 3-month plan to take actions toward achieving all of those innovations that I just shared with you. The easiest way to do that is to create swim lanes and to be able to map each individual action that is necessary to achieve that innovation. And not just a list of actions, but assign the name of the person responsible and the date that that needed to be done by. By implementing an action plan, you're able to make sure you're not missing any of the critical steps to getting towards a successful innovation. So if you're interested in hearing more about it or how to use this framework, you can visit our website, which is below in the description. Get a hold of us, and we'll be sure to get you some additional information. Thank you.